Greetings, everybody. Hard to imagine we've been through a winter and we're heading toward nicer weather. That's such a happy thing. And ever since the middle of December, when it was so dark, I relish the fact every day that there's more light. We have a wonderful program for March, and I want to tell you about it. I want to tell you that in the forming of the entire season, two things came out. One was composers' birthdays, and the other was the use of keyboards. Today's program is really about the latter, the use of keyboards. We have no composer birthdays to celebrate on this program. That will come in the remainder of the season. But every piece on this program features the piano. And interestingly enough, it will be one instrument, one piano, but in different settings. The first piece we're going to listen to today is one of the truly great masterpieces in any medium. It's the Fantasy by Franz Schubert, written in the beginning of his last year alive, 1828. He had already been diagnosed with a fatal illness a few years before that, and as this period of time came, he was a fanatic about writing more and more music. And what happened in those last 2 years in particular, 1827 and 28, is just mind-boggling. 3 great piano sonatas, the great C major symphony, the quintet with 2 cellos, the probably hundreds more songs, including the great cycle of Winterreise. And in the middle of all of that, there is this feeling when you listen to Schubert like you are in some other land. And I think he really had that personal space around him in which he relished the music that was inside of him and the friendships that he had in his circle. I read somewhere that Schubert used to wake up in the morning, rush to his table, and start writing down all the music that had come into his mind overnight. And that if somebody came to visit him, he said, "No, I'll see you at lunch later. I'm busy now." And that every morning, just every morning, full of writing notes on paper because they were all in his head. So the piece we're going to start with today is one of the greatest. And not taking anything away from all of those great pieces, it's the Fantasy in F minor for piano, 4 hands. He actually started writing it in January of 1828. And I think it went fairly quickly. It was done within a month or two, and a mention from his friend who heard the first performance of it, that he played it with a slightly younger colleague, pianist composer named Franz Lachner. And the next day, a friend who was at that circle, because that's the way he gave concerts for his circle of friends, the person wrote in his diary, "Yesterday we heard a memorable duo." It's memorable for sure. It's one of his greatest pieces. So this piece actually comes at an interesting moment in his life. He had, like all the composers of that time, Beethoven, anybody, Mozart, anybody you want to think about, he had students. And very often in Vienna, the kind of students that would come to somebody who was known as a great composer were from the aristocracy. We know that there was this famous Hungarian Viennese family called the Esterházys. One of the Esterházys, a young woman named Caroline Esterházy, was his student. She had been after him, and by the way, he was, from many reports, madly in love with her. But nothing ever came of that, as they call it, unrequited love. that they were at an event somewhere, and it happened that she was sitting next to him and said, "Why don't you ever dedicate a piece to me?" To which he replied famously, "Everything I write is dedicated to you." I mean, that's really kind of a deep attachment. But finally, when he finished this piece, he did dedicate it to her. And I've thought often she was a pianist, that part of the reason maybe he wrote this piece is that he wanted to sit at the piano next to her, like talked about in the time of Mozart, and play this piece with her. In any case, the piece is such an amazing piece, and I don't have too much to tell you about it because the beauty of it is in the listening. It starts with a haunting theme in F minor that keeps coming back at various moments. And it is really it's kind of a sonata in disguise, because there are four principal sections that could be thought of as movements, but there's no space between them. That just goes one right on into the other. And that theme, that haunting theme, keeps coming back from the very beginning to the very, very end. I don't have anything more to tell you about this piece except one oddity. The piece was so much loved that the Russian composer Dmitri Kabalevsky in 1961 decided to make a piano concerto out of it. But I will say that you can find so many magnificent performances of it, starting with Kissin and James Levine, and a long list of other very, very good pianists who they have to feel this piece in their fingers. So it's here for you to enjoy, and you don't have to use your fingers, but open your ears and let it touch your heart. For the middle piece on this program for March, I turned to one of our distinguished jazz faculty, Ethan Iverson, to see what we could come up with for a contribution to this program. We had wonderful conversations in which I learned so much about him that I didn't know because I also didn't know him. Now I think he's a friend for sure. And what I learned was that he had played and has played over the years a lot of standard classical music. He's done the Winterreise, the late great song cycle by Schubert with Mark Padmore. He's played very, very often with Yo-Yo Ma and the Mark Morris dance group. And then he got very involved with music of Stravinsky, where he was playing with Robert Kraft, the assistant of Igor Stravinsky. And for those of you who saw or came to or heard the program in September, that's the program which was all Stravinsky, ending with the Rite of Spring for two pianos, that commemorated the 50th anniversary of the passing of Igor Stravinsky. And so when we were talking about that, he said, well, you know, I have a piece by Stravinsky I'd like to play in there, and so maybe that would suit you. And I said, I have no doubt that you would do a magnificent performance of it, but I really am looking for something that would let our listeners know more about you and who you are more fully. I know what you're doing is informed by your contact with those great artists and that great music of those people, Schubert and Stravinsky. But I think we want something more that is about you. In the bat of an eyelash, he said, well, I'll write a piece for her. So he did, and I said, do you have a fancy title for it? He said, well, Piano Sonata will do. I said, okay. So I think we're very lucky. I feel very lucky that right now we have available to us a chance to meet the composer who's going to play the world premiere of his own piece and let him tell you what it's all about. So here is Ethan Iverson.
Thanks, Larry, for that wonderful introduction. I'm very happy to be part of this concert series. I should say that, yes, if you wake me up in the middle of the night and ask me, what are you, Ethan Iverson? I say, I'm a jazz pianist. But like many jazz pianists, I have had a long-standing interest in classical music or the European tradition. And I know actually both the pieces on the program that I'm not playing on, I once read through the Schubert F minor piece with great Christopher O'Reilly, who went to school here at NEC. And Brad Meldau, the great jazz pianist, we once met at the basement of Steinway Hall to play through the Brahms F minor quintet in the two piano arrangement together. I studied for quite a time with Fred Hirsch, another NEC alum, and of course Fred is very interested in classical music. It's a theme, but it's true that I've had a lot of sort of, I would almost say, working class experience with classical music, and I've it's a theme in my life that keeps returning, and Stravinsky is certainly a theme. As Larry suggested, the first time I played for a conductor was actually Robert Kraft. My girlfriend at the time said they needed a pianist for a choir rehearsal with Greg Smith singers. I was free, and that's literally the first time I played with a conductor was reading through the Stravinsky Mass with Robert Kraft. Much later, I was in a group called the Bad Plus, and one of our most famous records is a recording of The Rite of Spring, which I play more or less straight. I don't really improvise on it. I just play the score straight. And during the pandemic, I got very involved in composition. In fact, I've written 8 formal sonatas for 8 different instruments under a special commissioning project. But I haven't written a piano sonata yet. And when Larry said, well, yeah, don't play the Stravinsky piece, play something of your own, I thought, well, I guess now's the time. I've written all this other sonatas. It's time for my first piano sonata. It's going to be in 3 movements, Allegro, Andante, and Rondo. And the music material is, it's my language. It's coming into focus. There's something very dance-like about it. There is something Stravinskyan about it. I think you need to be a jazz pianist to really play it. There are swing rhythms and this sort of thing. There's quite a bit of polyrhythm. But it's also quite conservative in the sense that it's a proper sonata allegro and a proper song form andante and a proper rondo. It's an A-flat major, which suits, I think, because the rest of the music is in F minor is the focal point. I'm actually quite pleased that the sonata ended up being an A-flat. That's good. Anyway, I hope you'll be there, and thanks for listening.
The big piece that finishes this program tonight is a masterpiece by Johannes Brahms. We know it, and I've heard it all of these years, as the piano quintet in F minor. By the way, same key as the Schubert at the beginning of the program. Didn't think about that till now. Anyway, Brahms was still living in his birthplace town of Hamburg in North Germany at the age of 29 when he conceived, I would say out of love and admiration for Franz Schubert, none other than the person we heard at the beginning of the program, that he wanted to write a quintet for 2 cellos, 2 violins, and viola, so a string quartet plus the extra. Almost the last piece that Schubert had written was the amazing, great masterpiece, the C major quintet. And in early Brahms, you see these very long, flowing melodies, very much indebted to the natural lyrical gift of Schubert. Anyway, so he wrote it, and he started it. He was 29 years old, and he started it in September of 1862. He finished it, and he was very lucky, and we are all lucky, that there were some very important friendships in the life of Brahms, people who supported him. One was the great violinist Joseph Joachim, born actually in Budapest, but we think of as a German violinist, which was primarily how we should think of him. He lived mostly in Berlin and other places. And the other person who was still very important in his life was the widow of the composer Robert Schumann, Clara Schumann, great pianist. Brahms was in the habit, when he wrote pieces, of asking people in his circle of musical friends to react to them. And what's interesting is the reactions to the two cello version of this piece, this quintet, were conflicting. We had, first of all, his dear friend Joseph Joachim, great violinist, who was involved in every piece, including violin, all of Brahms's life. They had met when they were both very young, and at that point Joachim was more famous than Brahms. In any case, he sent the score of the two cello quintet to Joachim, and Joachim reported that, he said, "We've rehearsed this really, really hard." And after doing all of that, he wrote this: "I am unwilling to let the quintet pass out of my hands without having played it to you. I do not wish to dogmatize on the details of a work in which in every line shows some proof of overpowering strength. But what is lacking is, in a word, charm. After a time, on hearing the work quietly, I think you will feel the same as I do about it." And along with that, as was Joachim's habit, he sent a list of suggestions about what to change here to make it better for the instruments, to make it better for the piece. Brahms corrected all of those passages that Joachim had suggested, and he still wasn't happy about it. It was the string writing that really didn't seem to work. It was not comfortable for them and didn't seem to help the music come alive. A few months later, by February of 1864, Brahms had gone back to work, and he had changed the piece into a sonata for piano four hands. And in the process of doing, this is one of the sad things about Brahms, he was so determined to get rid of that string version that he destroyed it. So it's gone. But when the piano version came out, which is known as Opus 34B, he published it. Some time passed, it was played in concerts. Then, none other than Clara Schumann wrote him the following words: "The work is splendid, but it cannot be called a sonata," which is what he changed the title to. "Rather, it is a work so full of ideas that it requires an orchestra for its interpretation. These ideas are, for the most part, lost on the piano. The first time I tried the work, I had a feeling that it was an arrangement. So please, remodel it once more." When you have friends like that tell you the truth, sometimes it hurts. But deep down inside, you have to be grateful for what they've told you, because they speak truth. So Brahms went back to work again. And then he had a very good friend, a pianist named Hermann Levy, who said, "Why don't you make it into something that combines the two?" I mean, he didn't think about making it for orchestra. He hadn't written the symphony yet, by the way. And so Hermann Levy said he should take a string quartet and piano and put it together. Then by 1865, late 1865, when that version was done, this is what Levy wrote him: "The quintet is beautiful beyond words. Anyone who did not know it in its earlier forms of string quintet and two-piano sonata would never believe that it was not originally thought out and designed for the present combination of instruments. You have turned a monotonous work for two pianos into a thing of great beauty, a masterpiece of chamber music. And that's what we have. Now, a word about the piece. It is in four very large, complex movements. And it is a tough piece to play, and yet so rewarding because of its richness. It starts with a single theme, a unison theme, with the violin, the cello, and the piano. And then after that, miracles happen. As soon as that happens, then it comes in again very loud with everybody playing, and it goes through so many different areas and so many different complexities of things to happen that I'm not here to give a musicological or an analytical talk to you about how it's put together. I will just say this is big stuff. The middle movements are a beautiful, almost like a Schubert song, with a Hungarian rhythm, da-da, yada, yada, that with a strong downbeat. And in the middle of it has a joyous march. So that is the most easily expected kind of a movement that just flows out of him. After that comes a scherzo, which is scary, I should say. It is demonic and fierce and energized and wild. And when that finishes, the last movement is set up by a slow introduction, which is, the only word I can use is very searching music. And there's a leftover little bit of information here that is a detail, but it's worth noting if you know about it. He doesn't have two cellos anymore, but he had an idea for starting the movement that would have had the second cello playing something answered by the first cello. He doesn't have a second cello. Well, the beginning of the last movement, the second cello is played by the left hand of the piano. And you'll notice that if you remember it. When that turns away, there comes this very folk-like theme. Not joyful, in it, it's sad a little bit, you know? And then the movement goes through so many changes and ends with a fierce coda that is taking all of the material from anywhere in the piece and hurling to an end that is, again, triumphant, demonic, and ultimately very satisfying. I hope you'll enjoy the piece.